because freedom has never been guaranteed. Every generation has to earn it, fight for it, defend it in battle between autocracy and democracy, between the greed of a few and the rights of many. It matters. Our democracy is more than just a system of government. It's the very soul of America. It's how we've been able to constantly adapt through the centuries. It's why we've always emerged from every challenge stronger than we went in. And it's how we come together as one nation, united. And just as our fallen heroes have kept the ultimate faith with our country and our democracy, we must keep faith with them. Because of them, all of them, that we stand here today. We will never forget that. We will never, ever, ever stop working to make a more perfect union, which they lived and which they died for. That was their promise. That's our promise. Our promise today to them. That's our promise always.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Tuesday, May 28th. That was President Biden marking Memorial Day at Arlington National Cemetery with a somber message about freedom, democracy, and honoring those who've made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. It's certainly a day for reflection across the country.
Really is, and it's a special day, and has long been a special day for public servants who focused on those who have given their all, given their lives to this country. That's something that Donald Trump has said and told a general who was his chief of staff. He didn't understand that concept. Why would anybody give their all for America? And of course, maybe that's why he marked Memorial Day by blasting, well, anybody who was opposed to him and various legal proceedings against him. In a post yesterday morning, Trump wrote in part, quote, "Happy Memorial Day to all,
oh my God,
including the human scum that are working so hard to destroy our great." You know, I want to stop there, Willie, because he attacks judges. He attacks the woman that he was found liable for sexually assaulting. Did all of that, and it just reminds me that on a somber day like that, reminds me what it was said by Ken Burns at Brandeis University, where he was talking to the students, and he told them, you know, how America came to be, how it's striving to be a more perfect union, just like President Biden said. But he said, choose values over vulgarity. And sadly, a lot of Americans are not following that basic advice and the basic values of being patriotic and being a good citizen of this country. And you've got to look to people who use holidays, whether it's Christmas or whether, you know, it's Thanksgiving or whether it's Memorial Day, a sacred day like Memorial Day for America, to attack, quote, human scum, defined by Donald Trump as anybody who doesn't support him.
Yeah, that was an extraordinary commencement address by Ken Burns at Brandeis. We're going to play some of that coming up in just a little bit. So much in there, so much to say about our country, where we are, where we're headed, where we've been. Of course, he's such a good student of history. But yeah, I mean, Joe, what's disconcerting, I think, most about it is a phenomenon we've seen now develop over the last decade or so, which is the people who laugh and cheer along the show. Even yesterday, those posts, they view it as some kind of a troll and it'll upset us and we'll talk about it today. Even on the day where they call themselves patriots, a lot of those people, but a day he takes to make about himself, his own sacrifice on Memorial Day, his own sacrifice, his own martyrdom. It's always about him. And to the point you made earlier, he asked in that same conversation, according to General Kelly, looking at those headstones, what was in it for them? Why would you give your life for America? Why would you give your life in the defense of freedom around the world? What was in it for them? He genuinely, sincerely, deeply at his core, does not understand the sacrifice of the military, the sacrifice of people who put their lives on the line for the country. That's just, It's part of who he is, and we saw it on display again yesterday. And we always talk about this contrast. Look at the President of the United States at Arlington, a place that gives anybody who has a patriotic bone in their body or a human bone in their body chills just to walk through and look at those headstones. And then look at what his opponent in this election was doing yesterday. There's your contrast right there. And it wasn't just former President Trump. It was his son, Eric, getting some well-deserved backlash over his social media posts after one user posted a photo of the Trump family with the caption, quote, "The family that gave up everything to save America. Thank you."
Oh, my God.
This is over Memorial Day weekend. Eric Trump reposted, writing, "And we will do it again." Former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, a military pilot, as you know, responded, quote, "Your family has sacrificed nothing. Your name will become synonymous with Benedict Arnold. And how dare you tweet this weekend? You don't know the first thing about service, you child." The congressman talking to Eric Trump there. This comes after Eric Trump posted a Memorial Day promotion for the Trump store on Instagram that read, "We are honoring our brave men and women this weekend. Please buy our stuff." Eric since deleted that post. The Trump website still promoting that Memorial Day sale. So there it all is in one place, guys.
Closing arguments are scheduled to begin this morning in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial. The defense will go first, with Trump attorney Todd Blanche expected to spend several hours on his summation argument. He will try to convince the jury the government did not meet its burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump not only falsified business records, but also had an intent to defraud that included, quote, "an intent to commit another crime or to aid or conceal the commission thereof." The prosecution will follow Blanche, likely reminding jurors they can trust the financial paperwork they've seen and the witnesses they've heard from. The arguments could take up most of the day. Once finished, there will be no rebuttals. Judge Juan Merchan will then give the jury its instructions, which is expected to last about an hour. So that could happen tomorrow. Let's bring in former litigator and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin and former U.S. attorney and MSNBC legal analyst Joyce Vance. So, Lisa, I'll start with you from covering it from inside the courthouse. What are you going to be watching for, and what can we expect today specifically from each side's closing arguments?
So, Mika, today, one of the things I'm going to be looking for is how Todd Blanche constructs a narrative out of what usually is hole poking. When you're the defense, what you really want to do is try and create doubt in the jurors' minds about the narrative that they've just heard. So, for example, Todd Blanche will spend a lot of time saying that these legal invoices and the other documentation of the repayment scheme, they're not actually false because, in fact, Michael Cohen was appointed as the personal attorney to Donald Trump. He did, in fact, perform legal services, and it wasn't incorrect for these documents to then refer to the payments as for legal expenses or retainers. But you can only do that sort of hole poking for so long. So how Todd Blanche turns that exercise into a coherent, cohesive narrative that the jurors follow and eagerly is something I'm interested in seeing. On the other side, Josh Steinglass's job is less about feelings and more about facts. And it is to convince the jury that everything that they've seen fits together neatly like a jigsaw puzzle. So he has elicited evidence over these last 6 weeks, sometimes from disparate time periods or people who don't go together. Now's the time for them to connect the dots in the ultimate way, chronologically, methodically, and most importantly, without very much reliance on Michael Cohen. They want to show the jury that they don't really need Michael Cohen to prove their case. There are a couple of episodes where Michael Cohen's testimony stands alone and unrebutted because anybody else who was in the room has not taken the stand or was not called to the stand. But for the most part, all of the evidence in this case comes from other sources, too, from people like David Pecker and Hope Hicks, from a series of documents that range from the allegedly falsified documents themselves to phone records and emails and texts. There is a mountain of evidence in this case. It's Josh Steinglass's job today to convince the jury of just how much there is and how little of it came from the mouth of one Michael Cohen.
Lisa, can we talk briefly about the mechanics of what we're going to see today, which is that because this is a New York State criminal trial, the defense goes first, prosecution gets the last word, which is sort of not what we've seen in other places or people are used to seeing in the movies. Donald Trump says in a post yesterday that this is unfair to him, it's a witch hunt, et cetera, et cetera. We should point out this is not unique to Donald Trump. This is New York State criminal court. Why do they do it that way, and how does it impact what the jury hears effectively?
Well, I'll give you the best case for New York State doing it this way. It's because the prosecution bears the burden of proof. They get to go last. If your burden is to show beyond a reasonable doubt that these crimes were committed, then it makes sense that you get the ultimate say about what happened here. It is a shame that Donald Trump's very good lawyers in this case, and I want to be clear, I think Emil Bovee and Susan Necheles and Todd Blanche are all good lawyers, didn't have the opportunity in consulting with their client to explain to him how today is supposed to work and to enable him to lie to the American people about this process and to make it seem as if he's being singled out when this is what every single criminal defendant in New York State faces.
So, Joyce, let's get your preview of today. What do you think the top key arguments that each side needs to make as they try to sway jurors?
Right. So, at the end of every closing argument by a defendant, if you don't have a little bit of real reasonable doubt in your mind after listening to the argument, the defense hasn't done its job. And I think that's what we'll hear today from the defense when they go first. Their job is to raise questions, to poke holes in this edifice of evidence that the government constructs throughout a trial. Some of the most important arguments will center on Michael Cohen and his credibility. In many ways, there's strong circumstantial evidence. We'll hear the people of the state of New York talk about that in their closing argument. But the defense will have a legitimate argument that if Michael Cohen isn't credible, that entire mountain of evidence is built on a platform that can't hold it up. Michael Cohen's credibility will be front and center in their argument, and they'll also, along the edges of that argument, point out that he was providing legal services, that these paper records don't meet the technical elements of fraudulent records. When it's the people's turn, they'll come back with this argument. They will argue that proof beyond a reasonable doubt doesn't depend on any one piece of evidence. It's all of the evidence taken together. And so they constructed an immaculate case, whereas we discussed while the trial was ongoing, they corroborated as much of Michael Cohen's testimony as they could before he took the stand. We'll hear them remind jurors of witnesses whose testimony they've forgotten. They testified weeks ago, starting with David Pecker. And this is an important process that prosecutors go through at the end of a trial. It's memory reconstruction, telling the jurors, don't rely on our memory, rely on yours. But here's what happened at the beginning of this trial. And they will layer evidence upon evidence to say, those holes that the defense tried to poke in our case, there are only one or two pieces of evidence deep, but there are 4 or 5 other pieces of evidence that corroborate. For instance, Donald Trump's willingness to engage in a crime that was designed to cover up or commit other crimes. At the end of the people's argument, they will tell the jury that proof beyond reasonable doubt doesn't depend on any one piece of evidence or any one witness. It depends on all of the evidence built together, and that there's too much here to ignore. Strong, direct, and circumstantial evidence of Donald Trump's guilt.
John Heilman on Way Too Early, which, of course, seen by more people, larger share of the audience last week than any show going all the way back to the Beatles' debut on Ed Sullivan. But this morning, he reported in his Politico column, he told us about his report that if Donald Trump is convicted in New York, that the Biden team is going to start using that, possibly even in social media, talking about convicted felon Donald Trump. And Joe Biden, who hasn't spoken yet about this trial, will start speaking about it, Jonathan Lemire reports, after the verdict. Now, we've been talking about, you and I think we both believe that up to now, all of these charges, even the convictions in the other cases, have actually helped Donald Trump with his base, not really persuaded many people. They aren't paying attention. What do you think about what Jonathan Lemire is reporting? If Biden starts leaning into it, if Trump is convicted, does that have an impact from what you've seen?
Well, I mean, Joe, I think, this is something that we've talked about also. I mean, I think this is the no man's land, the terra incognita version of all this. We have no idea, and no one has the faintest clue of what the psychic political effects on the very small pool of persuadable voters in the very small number of states on which this election will turn, what impact it will have. Jonathan's reporting is consistent with what I have heard. There's no doubt that the Biden campaign, if he's convicted, the campaign is going to start labeling Donald Trump a convicted felon. Trump will appeal this verdict for sure, and he will almost certainly not be put behind bars between now and November. That matters to some people. There's been some polling that suggests that those voters we're talking about, seeing Trump not just convicted but imprisoned is different than just seeing him convicted. So he's going to appeal. He's almost certainly not going to go to jail. The Biden campaign is going to call him a convicted felon. Whether Joe Biden does that more than once, we don't know the answer to that yet. But we're talking about such a small number of voters. And, in a world where almost everyone has an opinion about this case, this is a case that the actions in question took place in 2006 and 2016. Everyone in the world, we think, has a firmly set view about Donald Trump, Stormy Daniels, Michael Cohen, the payments, this, that, the other thing. There is some small number of people out there in the country who haven't decided about what they think about the election, what they think about this case, and convicted felon could move a very small but really crucial number of them. And that is one of the things the Biden campaign is not going to leave to chance. They're going to rightly call Donald Trump a convicted felon if he's a convicted felon.
Which brings me to a moment I've dreaded and forces me to suspend my long-standing attempt at neutrality. There is no real choice this November. There is only the perpetuation, however flawed and feeble you might perceive it, of our fragile 249-year-old experiment, or the entropy that will engulf and destroy us if we take the other route. When, as Mercy Otis Warren would say, the checks of conscience are thrown aside and a deformed picture of the soul is revealed. The presumptive Republican nominee is the opioid of all opioids, an easy cure for what some believe is the solution to our myriad pains and problems, when in fact, with him you end up re-enslaved with an even bigger problem, a worse affliction and addiction, a bigger delusion, James Baldwin would say, the author and finisher of our national existence, our national suicide, as Mr. Lincoln prophesies. Do not be seduced by easy equalization. There is nothing equal about this equation. We are at an existential crossroads in our political and civic lives. This is a choice that could not be clearer.
Ken Burns delivering the commencement address at Brandeis University. Mike Barnicle joins us now. Mike, your old friend Ken Burns, like John Meacham, spending his professional life taking the large view, the long view of history, and delivering a powerful address that culminated with a commentary about what's happening in our country today, where we're about to be going, and making a plea to the young people in that room, but also to the audience that's going to see it larger than that, that this is, from a man who has some perspective on these things, given his life's work, this is a pivotal moment.
Yeah, it is. The root of Memorial Day in the word memorial is memory. And you wonder, in listening to Ken's speech over the weekend at Brandeis, you wonder, is our memory so fleeting that we have forgotten about something else that Ken mentioned? One of the greatest stories in history, the story of America, the formation of America. We remember Ronald Reagan in 1984 talking about its morning in America. And now the reality is many people walking around probably wondering, is it twilight in America because of all the divisions in this country? I think we exaggerate the divisions because we are all Americans. But the idea that this country is so filled with, as he pointed out, right, left, red state, blue state, we are all Americans. Whether we came here from Pakistan or Vietnam, whether our parents came from Ireland or Germany or Italy, we are all Americans. And the idea that we seem to be loosening or maybe even losing that grip that ties us together as Americans and one common purpose, to continue to pursue freedom, not only for our children, but for our grandchildren. The idea that we're losing that is horrifying. It's beyond horrifying. It's a tragedy. And we've got to come to grips with this, with ourselves, really, to stop hating each other, to have a conversation with each other. I have no idea the percentage of Americans who don't even know their neighbors, who have never been in their neighbor's home. I have no idea of the number of children who missed so much because of COVID, no matter what their age, missed first grade, missed second grade, missed high school graduations, and would become isolated from one another in our fear of the future. And the future we measure now by a week's paycheck, by a month's paycheck. Where are we going? We've got to be told again and again the story of America, the real story of America.
You know, John Meacham, I love the part, and it spoke to me so much because it was a great concern that Mick and I have been talking about over time, not about who wins or loses this fall, but which obviously concerns us, but just the challenges that are before us and before Americans. And as Ken said, we are imprisoned by our own binary reactions, presumptions and prejudices, and people just, again, simplifying things, stripping it down, not understanding the complexities, and like you and I have talked about, just running to whatever tribe they've picked. You look at AI, the grave challenges that poses on a existential scale to humanity, but also the threats to working Americans and jobs going away. You look at global warming. The evidence grows by the day, and yet we're really not doing anything significant about that. You look at people's sense of safety when they're walking through large cities, and the fact that they can't get enough police officers. People don't want to be police officers anymore. Not enough, if you ask the LAPD, if you ask the Philadelphia Police Department. There are these huge challenges. Well, and you've got Vladimir Putin on the march in Ukraine, again, because people didn't look at the issue as Americans have since World War II, freedom versus tyranny. They looked at it tribally. And so Mike Johnson held up aid because Donald Trump told him to hold up aid, and other Republicans who were always cold warriors just completely collapsed because they have this binary vision of America. It has nothing to do with ideology. I mean, it's you have voted for Republican presidents in your life. I sure have voted for a lot of Republican presidents in my life. Dr. Brzezinski endorsed Republican presidents during his lifetime. It's not a binary choice. You look at who's best for America, but now everything is divided, not by ideas, not by ideology, but the tribalism, where on one side you have a president praising those and the memory of those who gave their lives for America, and on the other side, a vile president, former president, who vile when he talks about the fallen, saying doesn't get it, what was in it for them to defend their country, and decides to write on Memorial Day, instead of lifting up those who gave their all for America, attacking those who opposed him by calling them human scum. Let's talk about Ken Burns, what Ken Burns said. and how we move back, actually, to that sort of promised land.
Well, I think we could do a lot worse than listening to what Ken said, what Mike said, what you just said. Reality is not binary, but the choice we face is. And that's an irony in all of this. I go back to this tension between what is patriotism and what is nationalism. And patriotism, classically understood, is allegiance to an idea. And the idea of America, however imperfectly realized, is that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And that's our mission statement. And the Constitution, as it's been said, is our user's guide. And we've lived out of compliance a hell of a lot more years with that mission statement than we have in compliance. But at least we keep trying to get there. Nationalism, roughly understood, is just an allegiance to people who look like you, to people who worship the same God, to people who share the same ethnic characteristics. And that is a fundamental, vital, defining difference in how cultures organize themselves. Are we loyal to an idea that sometimes means I have to give as opposed to take, which is not part of human nature, right? Since the third chapter of Genesis, it's been more fun for us to take than to give, right? And so, but democracy, American democracy, as it's unfolded, is about giving as well as taking and seeing each other as neighbors. And, you know, without that, then politics is a total war. It's the law of the jungle, and it's going to keep unfolding in this disastrous way.
I love what you said. America is an idea.
Yeah.
And as General Hayden has said on the show before, America is a creed. You raise your right hand, you swear an oath to America, and you become an American citizen. I've said this before, and I think it's beautiful. My family has been in this country. I don't know. We kind of get lost going back in the 1700s. We've been here like 300 years. Today, someone will raise their right hand. Today, maybe, I don't know, maybe from Indonesia, maybe from Pakistan, maybe from Denmark. It doesn't matter where they come from. They raise their right hand. They take that oath of allegiance to this country, and they become every bit as much of an American as anybody in my family that's been here for centuries. Now, if you don't see the beauty in that, and if you don't understand how different that is, even from Britain or France or Spain, in most countries, when you open your mouth and you talk, like even in Britain, people know everything about you, and they judge you in large part because of your accent, where you're from, your schooling. In America, lift your hand, make an allegiance to the oath, the United States of America, and you, my friend, are an American. And that is a simple beauty that Donald Trump will never understand.
All right, June 12th will mark what would have been the 100th birthday of President George H.W. Bush. And to honor the legacy of the 41st president, John Meacham, you have curated over 450 photos that best capture his storied life. They're compiled in a new book entitled The Call to Serve: The Life of an American President, George Herbert Walker Bush. First of all, give us a sense of why you decided to put this together now, and we'd like to go through a few of them with you.
So centennials of presidents are often revealing. George Washington's in the 1930s, which is the bicentennial, was a reminder of why we were doing this amid the Depression and the forces. FDR's centennial in the early 80s gave Ronald Reagan a chance to talk about that he was really trying not to repeal the New Deal, but the Great Society. President Bush himself was part of Dwight Eisenhower's centennial as he was trying to build a world order that was really more about the center of governance as opposed to the extremes, just as the world was beginning to change. And, you know, I'm a great admirer of George H.W. Bush's. I was his biographer. I like to say I didn't fall in love with him, but I did come to love him, not least because at critical moments, however imperfect he was, he would put the country above his own interest. He was driven by ambition. He was driven to have ultimate authority in a nuclear age. But once he had power, he always did the right thing. June 12th, the centennial, big event in College Station, where his presidential library is. And I think he is someone we have to contemplate in this moment, not because he's remote, but because he's so resonant. You know, his character, his imperfections, his vices, and his virtues are all within reach. And they shed light on what's possible, not because he's perfect, but because he was imperfect. And yet we managed to create a more perfect union in that era.
John, the pictures, the photographs in this book are extraordinary, and they go back all the way through his life. But there's one most recent that gets at your point, which is when Senator Dole rose, and it still gives me chills to think about this and to see the image, rose from his wheelchair. This is in December of 2018 to salute the casket of President George H.W. Bush. And these two men of the same generation who made the kind of sacrifice that we don't see as much now as we did then, the kind of men that you've seen. Perhaps there's a lot of nostalgia and romanticism about that era, and for good reason, because as you have written many times, George H.W. Bush was a man of privilege who could have avoided that kind of service, but tried actually to get into the military earlier than he was even allowed to.
So that's a marvelous, I mean, look at that for a second, as you say. These two men were about as different as you could be. George H.W. Bush was born in Milton, Massachusetts, went to Greenwich Country Day School, Andover, Yale. Bob Dole, Russell, Kansas. He was in the Army. He lost, he was so grievously wounded. President Bush, though he was shot down in the Pacific in 1944, used to say, you know, in the Navy, when you were a Navy pilot, you flew off, you did your mission, but then you came back and there were milkshakes in the wardroom. Bob Dole didn't get milkshakes. And they fought each other for decades in the Republican Party. And this was a Republican Party that tragically is virtually unrecognizable today. And there you have these two rivals recognizing in each other that what united them was more important than what divided them. And that's not a presidential library coffee mug statement, right? These were real people. We actually, you know, a lot of us knew these folks. I remember being with Senator Dole and President Bush very late, very late in their lives. And Senator Dole ordered a Cosmo from the bartender. And President Bush said, "Bob, what's in that?" And he said, "I don't know, but there's a lot of vodka." And Bush said, "Okay, I'm in." You know, so it's a small thing, but they were brought together by this notion that the Constitution mattered, that America mattered. And the fact that this seems nostalgic tells us more about where we are now than I think any of us would like to.
Yeah, John, you know, you're so right. That is a magnificent photo. Bob Dole, 10th Mountain Division, is a very young man, badly wounded in Italy. George H.W. Bush, 20 years old, climbs into a cockpit, fighter pilot. Not having to do so, he could have gotten out of it. There were many, and we grew up knowing people like this who never spoke about their wartime experiences. But one experience captured in one of the photos in the book that George H.W. Bush used to speak about a lot was baseball and throwing out the first pitch at an Astros game in 1986. There he is, the sly left-hander on the mound throwing it. Tell us about this picture and tell us about Bush and baseball.
Well, he played at Andover and at Yale. He played in the first two College World Series, lost both of them, unfortunately. He was a first baseman. Someone once said of him, good field, no hit, which actually wasn't true. If you go back and look at the records, Barbara Bush kept score at each Yale game. And I think he had about a 240 lifetime average, which better than I would ever get. His father had played baseball for Yale. He kept his first baseman's mitt in his desk in the Oval Office, as a relic, which for those of us who believe that baseball is in fact a sacred undertaking, that tells us a lot. The great thing about George H.W. Bush and the fact that baseball was his favorite sport is it really is a metaphor. It really does tell you something. Because what is baseball but a game of endurance? And you don't have to get it right every time. And the greatest of us, the greatest baseball players, get it right about once every 5 times, right? I once heard him, he once got in a debate with my son, who was, I think he was about 10 probably, and they were discussing who was better, Babe Ruth or Lou Gehrig. And my son, being 10 years old, thought that power was most important, and he said Babe Ruth. And President Bush said, no, it was Gehrig, because he just showed up every day. And that's what George Bush did.
With court to get underway in just a few minutes, let's go live to the courthouse in Lower Manhattan, where we find NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, good morning. What are you looking for today?
Right, Willie. To Clara's point here, when you're looking at Michael Cohen, this is the opportunity for the prosecution to present the case to the jury in a consolidated form. Look, there were 5 weeks of testimony, 20 witnesses brought by the prosecution, 2 from the defense team. And you could expect, when it comes to Michael Cohen, one of those 2 defense witnesses, Robert Costello, being at the heart of the prosecution's closing arguments to this jury, showing that, look, Robert Costello was one of those individuals as late as 2018 that was somebody allied with Donald Trump who was continuing to put pressure as part of this long-running conspiracy to silence the likes of Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. That you should look from the prosecution in their closing arguments that they're going to make the case that the underlying crime was election fraud, a long-running conspiracy that went from 2015 all the way into 2018 into the efforts to keep Michael Cohen from flipping on Donald Trump, talking to federal investigators and talking to state investigators. And you saw the defense team, as part of their effort to call into question Michael Cohen's credibility, then focus on that one particular phone call on the night of October 24th. But the district attorney's office is going to reiterate to this jury that Michael Cohen says he had more than 20 calls in October 2016 alone about the Stormy Daniels payment, and that the defense was never able to refute the January 17th 2017 meeting in which Michael Cohen says that he scratched down on a bank statement with Alan Weisselberg the reimbursement scheme that was ultimately executed over the course of those next 11 months. And so for the prosecution, they're going to try to tie all of this together, even going back to those text messages in the closing days of the 2016 campaign between Hope Hicks and Michael Cohen. You had Hope Hicks, a close ally of Donald Trump, testifying about the role that Michael Cohen was playing in order to silence the the likes of Kara McDougal and Stormy Daniels' stories in those closing days. And so this is the opportunity for them this morning to present to this jury essentially a rap sheet of 5 weeks of testimony. Again, it's important that we know that the defense attorneys for Donald Trump will be the first to present their case here this morning in defense of the former president. They'll then turn it over to the prosecution. We could very well get jury instructions as early as this afternoon, though we could very well most likely wait for those instructions to come tomorrow morning.
I know who we are as Americans. We're the only nation in the world with a heart and soul that draws from old and new. Home to Native Americans, whose ancestors have been here for thousands of years. Home to people of from every place on earth. They came freely. Some came in chains. Some came when famine struck, like my ancestral family in Ireland. Some to flee persecution, to chase dreams that are impossible anywhere but here in America. That's America. And we all come from somewhere, but we're all Americans.
President Biden, during his State of the Union address back in March, highlighting the United States as a nation of immigrants. America's immigration story is the focus of a new off-Broadway play titled What Became of Us. Joining us now, one of the stars of that play, Tony Award-winning actor B.D. Wong. B.D., it's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
So this is we were just talking in the break about this play. We don't give away too much because it is such an experience that sort of surprises you as it goes.
Yes.
But how do you describe it to people who are thinking about going to see it?
The play uses immigration as a backdrop for the relationship of two siblings over their entire life and how their relationship to their parents and their immigration status is completely different. As an older sister who was born there and a younger brother who was born here, how their relationship to their parents is vastly different and how that affects their turbulent relationship as siblings.
And obviously you can see all the themes of this that are playing out in our society right now, have been playing out in our society for generations, of course, but particularly right now, this feels relevant. It feels like it's in the bloodstream.
Yeah, the value of even just understanding the definition of what an immigrant is and how unique that is to our American identity is, I think, super important. That's my entry point into loving the play, just sharing that definition that a lot of people don't land on in an everyday way. And I think it's really nice to talk about how our identity is informed by the fact that the people before us came here to create a better life for their kids and their families, and how that's the American dream.
So certainly the production is for everyone, but as you... Are you finding audience members who are immigrants themselves or whose parents were? Is that a particular resonance with them?
Absolutely. And I do, what I love about this play by Cheyenne Lotfi is that it has such an incredible way of people drawing their own story from it. Whether they're immigrants or not, everybody's able to they see themselves in these two people. It's very interesting and kind of a Rorschach blot. In that way. But I mean, it's very moving and it's very funny. And I think people really respond to the identification, the validation that we have, that we're talking about, this immigration kind of status that is somewhere in our identity, no matter who we are.
And there's a fascinating presentation, which is, as you say, there are two casts, effectively, right, working not on the same nights, but differently. Right. How does that play out, and what texture does that bring to it?
It's wonderful. Atlantic Theater is a wonderful, innovative, state-of-the-art theater company, and they are doing something that's never, ever done, and that is to have two casts that are doing a play that is very universal. It is where Rosalind Chow and I are opening the play very soon, next week, and then subsequently Tony Shalhoub and Shohreh Aghdashloo will be doing the play overlapping with us, so you could see both of us in both casts on the same day if you wanted to. But it will show you and highlight the individuality of the immigration experience side by side, and also show you what the similarities are.
You have an extraordinary resume. You've won a Tony, as we mentioned, but you've also been in these massive films, the Father of the Bride movies. You were so great in the Jurassic Park movies. What do you get out of this off-Broadway experience that you can't get anywhere else?
There's no editor, so I'm my own editor, right? And I am there with one other wonderful actor, Rosalind Chow, and we are in charge of our own performances. And it's what they call a two-hander, so it's a huge responsibility. There's a lot of words and a lot of wonderful language by Cheyenne Lotfi, and it is a beautiful play. And so you get that immediacy with the audience. You can hear the audience weeping, you can hear the audience sighing and finding recognition in what you're saying, and you don't get that when you're working in an on-camera medium at all. You just have to kind of imagine it while you're doing the performance before the camera. But here you don't have to imagine it. It's there. That satisfaction is great for me. I love that experience. That's why I became an actor in the first place, to have that experience.
Well, there's a lot of talk about this play. It's called What Became of Us. It's playing off-Broadway at the Atlantic Theater in New York City. B.D. Wong, so great to have you here today. Congratulations.
Thank you. Golly, guys, thank you so much.